Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. We are one day away from President Trump's second State of the Union address. He was supposed to deliver it last Tuesday, but that date was postponed due to the partial government shutdown, which lasted a record 35 days. But another shutdown could be just 11 days away. Lawmakers have until February 15th to reach a border security deal the president will sign. In an interview with Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan, the president wouldn't rule out the possibility of another shutdown if those talks fail. He also made it clear he's still considering declaring a national emergency to get funding for his border wall.
Would you shut down the government again?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens on February 15th.
And you're not taking it off the table?
Well, I don't take anything off the table. I don't like to take things off the table. It's that alternative. It's national emergency. It's other things. And, you know, there have been plenty national emergencies called.
Let's bring in Zeke Miller, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Sabrina Siddiqui. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Sabrina is a CBSN political contributor and political reporter for The Guardian. Welcome to all of you. Sabrina, I'd like to start with you. A new CBS News poll found 66% of Americans believe the president should not declare a national emergency to pay for a border wall. How does he use the State of the Union address to actually try and make his case to the American people?
Well, I don't think that the president's messaging will be terribly different from the State of the Union he delivered last year, or for that matter, the prior year, his joint address to Congress, where he once again outlined what is a very hardline agenda on immigration and raised the specter of a crisis along the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, the challenge, of course, is that if he wanted to declare a national emergency, he could have done so in December before the government shutdown was triggered, or at any point in time throughout what was a 35-day partial closure of the government. So it, of course, undermines the argument that there is, in fact, an emergency if he waited this long. And also, he's getting pushback even from Republicans on Capitol Hill who say that this could create a dangerous precedent because it is ultimately a policy objective. And a future Democratic president could, for example, declare a national emergency on climate change just to enact environmental regulations. So he's getting certainly some Republicans saying, don't go down this road, let Congress determine this matter.
So it's interesting. That poll also found 75% of Americans want congressional Democrats to keep negotiating rather than force a shutdown if no deal is reached by February 15th. Zeke, what is the latest on those negotiations?
Well, we don't really know a whole lot about them other than neither side seems to be moving off of their hardline positions. The Republicans wanting to back the president up on his demand for a border wall, and also don't want to particularly be left out to dry if the White House were to back away from any agreement that they do reach. They want to stay in lockstep with the president. And then Democrats being very vocal about their opposition to any sort of border wall. You know, the substantive talks are really just getting off the ground. And this is while this is a topic that has been debated in Washington for decades, really, border security, and certainly has been a bit of focus of discussions and debate over the last couple of months. It's not a lot of time. 3 weeks is not a lot of time, and really it's now less than 10 days, 11 days before the government shuts down again. To get any sort of big comprehensive deal does take some time, and there are some doubts that can be accomplished in the next 11 days.
So then, Caitlin, what about this possibility of a national emergency? What are the political and legal considerations the president has to weigh when he makes that decision?
Well, it's a good point. There are legal implications of this, and Democrats said that they would push forward with challenges, and that makes Republicans, quite frankly, very uncomfortable. And you've been hearing from them on Capitol Hill. While some, like Lindsey Graham, have advocated for this approach, others have said that the president shouldn't go that route, that they'd like to work this out legislatively. And we also know that Republicans had been very uncomfortable during the Obama administration whenever he used executive order or the pen and the phone, as he called it. So it would be kind of a hypocritical change of tone there. So that's kind of what you're seeing from them. And then on the political front, the president would be admitting some kind of defeat. He and the White House have said, Kellyanne Conway said today, that it would be a last resort, that they did want Congress to figure out some legislative way to get that border wall funding, and this would be a last resort to go that route. But he's also facing this idea that he got a lot of pushback from his base at the first iteration of this before the government shut down, and then As he reopened the government, he got a lot of pushback from people on Fox News and in conservative media to the way he was going about this. So this seems to be a signal to his base that he wants to make good on this promise, but he hasn't made a compelling case to the public as reflected in that polling.
So meantime, the president also discussed his policy for the removal of troops from the Middle East. He now says he wants to keep troops in Iraq, and here's his explanation for that.
Well, we spent a fortune on building this incredible base. We might as well keep it. And one of the reasons I want to keep it is because I want to be looking a little bit at Iran, because Iran is a real problem.
Whoa, that's news. You're keeping troops in Iraq because you want to be able to strike in Iran?
No, because I want to be able to watch Iran. All I want to do is be able to watch. We have an unbelievable and expensive military base built in Iraq. It's perfectly situated for looking at all over different parts of the troubled Middle East. Rather than pulling up, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, we're going to keep watching.
All right, a lot to unpack in that answer. Just last week, the president's intelligence chief said Iran is abiding by the terms of the nuclear deal. Sabrina, is President Trump risking further damage to his relationship with the intelligence community?
Predict what intelligence leaders have said, and that's been a recurring theme of his presidency. But I think more importantly, his comments on keeping troops in Iraq in particular come at a time when the U.S. has been quietly engaged in what are very sensitive negotiations about keeping troops in the region in order to bolster the fight against ISIS. And so, this is also coming when the president had abruptly decided to withdraw troops from Syria. That's something that his former defense secretary, James Mattis, disagreed with. And it reinforces that it's not entirely clear who is calling the shots on foreign policy or what really the president what his policy toward the Middle East is. I also think that he's sort of saying the quiet part out loud, even if part of the motivation is to keep an eye on Iran. That's not something that the president typically says or admits to in public. And so that also just intensifies some of the existing instability in the region.
So, Zeke, let me ask you, Iraq's president responded to this, saying the U.S. never asked his permission to use its resources to watch Iran and said, quote, "Don't overburden Iraq with your own issues." So is the White House concerned about how this could impact its relationship with Iraq? And what are you hearing more broadly to Sabrina's point about this notion of an American president saying out loud, maybe, we want to keep troops there to keep an eye on Iran?
Yeah, well, first off, U.S. troops, certainly at that level aren't there to necessarily keep an eye on Iran. That may be the president's way of messaging it. But Margaret's question really, in that interview, we got to the point, there is a deterrence to Iran if they ever were to try to seek that nuclear breakout, which the president does have a bit of a disagreement with his intelligence officials on. But it's also to counter sort of Iran's regional influence in Syria, in other places, and also it's a hedge against a resurgence of the Islamic State in Syria. In terms of the relationship, particularly with the Iraqi government, that is something that has, sort of been an on-again, off-again relationship over the last couple of years. The last round of parliamentary elections were not particularly friendly to U.S. interests there. There was sort of a surge of Iranian-backed candidates who performed well. That is something that the Trump administration has been monitoring with great concern over the last year or so. And tensions are high. But if you talk to White House officials when it comes to those concerns, they dismiss them. Their argument is the U.S. Toppled Saddam Hussein, and then just over the last 5 years helped fend off the Islamic State. So the Iraqi government, which was not equipped to handle the Islamic State, doesn't have a whole doesn't have a whole lot of influence when it comes to this administration deploying troops where they want to. That's sort of the America First wing of the Trump White House view. It's a little different from where we heard Trump, the candidate's view, back in 2015, 2016, when he was going to be bringing all U.S. troops home. But that is sort of where they're thinking on that issue now.
Let's turn to another topic. I want to play a part of the president's interview where he was asked about the possible release of the special counsel's report.
Would you make the Mueller report public because you say there's nothing in there?
It's totally
Congress
up to the
subpoena
Attorney General.
it anyway, though.
Totally up to the Attorney General.
But what do you want them to do?
Even the Mueller report said it had nothing to do with the campaign. When you look at some of the people and the events, it had nothing to do.
You wouldn't have a problem if it became public.
Excuse me. No, it's up to the Attorney General. I don't know. It depends. I have no idea what it's going to say.
Sabrina, what are some of the factors William Barr has to consider in determining whether or not to make the Mueller report public?
Well, this is actually one of the sticking points for Democrats as the Senate considers William Barr's nomination. And in his testimony before members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, he did not commit to releasing the Mueller report publicly, and he didn't really respond with clarity to their questions around under what circumstances he would or would not release the report. Now, look, if there is classified information that typically has been redacted, we've seen that in some of the filings filed, for example, by the special counsel and his team. The question really becomes, what does Barr do if the White House is trying to invoke executive privilege and prevent the release of this report to the public because they do not want to incriminate the president or his associates? And that is something that if Barr were to side with the White House in a way that gives the impression that he's protecting the president, could end up in the courts. Democrats, you can be certain, would challenge on a legal basis the president and the attorney general to release the report. And this is something that could make its way all the way to the Supreme Court. I really do think this will be the next front in this investigation once Mueller and his team have concluded their work.
So the president was also asked about impeachment. He called it political and said it was the only way Democrats could win the 2020 election. So, Caitlin, in reality here, like we look at the actual political landscape now, what is the likelihood of impeachment proceedings actually moving forward in the House and Senate?
Well, there is certainly an appetite among Democrats in the base of the party, among Democratic voters, to move forward with impeachment, especially every time there's a new iteration of the Mueller report coming out or Mueller findings coming out. But on Capitol Hill, lawmakers in charge of the relevant committees have been playing a much more cautious line because a lot of them were, quite frankly, there during the Clinton era and kind of, know how these things go. So they're exercising some caution there and wanting to see where the investigation goes from here. You also have several Democrats currently running for president. So we're in the middle, or at the beginning, I should say, of a Democratic primary, and there's this argument to be made that they want to make this case against Trump at the ballot box. So there are a lot of different feelings within the Democratic Party about moving forward with impeachment. But we saw in 2018, when the president was campaigning across the country, he invoked the specter of impeachment to try to rally the Republican base, even those who weren't that excited about him, or even those who had some problems with him and his rhetoric. He would use it as a way to say, look, you may not like everything that I'm doing, but Democrats want to impeach me and therefore go against what you Republicans had voted for. So I wouldn't be surprised if he keeps talking about this, even if Democrats aren't going that route just yet.
All right. One last question. Zeke, a recent report from Axios is raising questions about the president's daily schedule and the amount of so-called executive time. A number of aides have called the leaking of the schedule disgraceful, and one former aide likened it to premeditated murder. What's the latest you're hearing, Zeke, at the White House about this?
There really is a lot of consternation inside the West Wing about the motivation, the identity of the leaker and their motivations. This is clearly something designed to embarrass the president. We've seen a lot of leaks over the last couple of years, sort of people within the administration trying to fight it out with a different faction of political aid, with a different ideological viewpoint. But this was a sort of a leak that could only have come from the building, designed to personally embarrass the president. He's faced a lot of scrutiny over the last couple of years in office over how much time he actually spends sort of visibly doing his job. Obviously, any president is always at work, subject to phone calls and dealing with crises and things like that. But this president operates in a very different way than others. He doesn't have formal meetings, doesn't have a defined schedule, as we've seen now. Now that these documents have been released. And this was designed not sort of to give that fuller picture of how this president works. It was designed to embarrass the president and the people around him. And that has a lot of people inside the building looking over their shoulders, trying to identify the mole in their midst. The challenge that they're going to have is that, yes, this is a very public leak, a very embarrassing one, but there have been a lot of other leaks. This president is not somebody who has engendered a whole lot of personal loyalty among his staff, and the factionalism that we've seen within the West Wing has been something that has led not to a single team mentality, but everyone looking out for themselves most often. So this is not necessarily something that's going to end. This may be the beginning of yet another round of leaks to come.
All right, never a shortage of palace intrigue there. Zeke Miller, Caitlin Huey-Burns, and Sabrina Siddiqui, thanks to you all.
Thank you.